You know, it's this week, 3 years ago, was the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And we have yet to recover. If this Congress does not get serious, then the structural budget imbalances facing this economy could permanently reduce the labor productivity and economic growth for years to come. A launching point for getting our fiscal house in order should be the overhaul of the federal income tax code. And if that means lowering tax rates, eliminating tax expenditures and other loopholes, and simplifying the tax code, then so be it. We hear a lot about entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare in particular. What we don't hear a lot about is the 250 entitlement programs cooked into the tax code. Tax expenditures, the various tax credits, deductions, and exclusions grafted onto the tax code are entitlement programs, pure and simple, and if you're eligible, you can claim the benefit, and it's an expenditure, and there's no application process in order to get this benefit. And there's no annual or even periodic review of those expenditures' efficiency by the Congress. So tax expenditures are entitlement spending without accountability. Some of these tax expenditures, particularly those relating to oil and gas, they date back to the early 1900s. And might have outlived their justification. The last time Congress tackled the tax expenditures in a systematic way was 25 years ago in the Tax Act of 1986. I voted for that. Were you in the House at the time?
But I would have.
But you would have. That legislation took a hatchet to special interest and lowered the top individual tax rate from 50 to 28%, but the special interest came back then stronger than ever. And since 1986, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, Congress has enacted 158 new tax expenditures. Is it right for an oil company that they could reap an $11 billion tax windfall from the worst environmental disaster in our history and the Gulf oil spill? I think that's questionable. And I don't think oil spill cleanup cost due to the negligence of the parties that were drilling should be treated as an ordinary and necessary business expense. And that's just one tax break. Is it right that large multinational corporations can report record profits yet still pay no federal income tax? And of course, the example that has been out in the news quite a bit is General Electric, which had worldwide profits of over $14 billion, and they paid zero in income tax. Well, that doesn't seem to be right, doesn't seem to be fair. When you need a tax system that is embraced by the population as being fair, these are examples that strikes the everyday American as a system that is very unfair. Well, is it right that Wall Street executives can avoid millions in taxes using complex deferred compensation schemes while that average taxpayer can put no more than $5,000 a year into their Roth IRA? Or is it right that a special tax rule allows oil and other commodity speculators to treat a portion of their short-term trading profits as long-term capital gains in order to have a lower tax rate? In fiscal year 2008, tax expenditures such as these totaled $1.2 trillion in lost revenue. That's in 1 year. That sum is greater than the entire amount raised by individual income tax in that same tax year. It's also greater than all federal discretionary spending in that same year of 2008, and it's twice as much as all non-defense discretionary spending. Between 1972 and 2008, the number of tax expenditures more than quadrupled from 60 to 247, and over a 25-year period from 74 to 2008, tax expenditures climbed from 5.7% to 8.6% of GDP. If we simply reverted to the 74 level of tax expenditures, we could wipe out more than $400 billion off our annual deficit this year, and more than $4 trillion over 10 years. So tax expenditures can be characterized more accurately as tax earmarks because they represent favors for a particular interest, that is revenue that's not coming into the system that has to be made up someplace else by the average American taxpayer. And so tackling tax expenditures is not just about deficit reduction and increasing revenue, it's also about getting rid of distortions that act as a drag on investment and economic growth. And over the last 2 decades, our foreign trading partners have moved rapidly to modernize their tax systems to make them more relevant in a global economy where capital moves at the touch of a button, the click of a mouse, where intellectual property is easily transferred and goods are manufactured in global production chains that transcend borders. Here at home, the United States plods along with an antiquated tax system in which the rules for taxing international trade and investment were developed in the 1920s. And this time for tinkering has now passed, and we need to overhaul the way that we tax U.S. companies that operate around the world. So we're going to focus today on the subject of examining whether there is a role for tax reform in comprehensive deficit reductions and U.S. fiscal policy. One of the things is tackling tax expenditures, to make the tax code simple, fair, and equitable. The code is so complex that so many taxpayers just simply throw up their hands. They spend an estimated 7.6 billion hours each year complying with the filing requirements. And that means it's roughly $140 billion in 2008. 60% of the taxpayers paid tax preparers to fill out their forms. I could go on, and I will submit for the record the rest of the testimony here. Let me just, before I send it to my colleague, Senator Crapo, I want to say that we do have a panel that is extraordinary to speak on this subject. The first witness, Alan Greenspan, managed U.S. monetary policy under 4 presidents during the 5 terms as chairman of the Federal Reserve. And during that time, the United States grew from a $5 trillion to a $13 trillion economy. And John Taylor served as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors in the George H.W. Bush administration and as Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs in the George Bush administration. And he is a professor of economics at Stanford. Martin Feldstein served as chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors in the Reagan administration. And Dr. Feldstein has written more than 300 research articles in the field of economics, founded the National Bureau of Economic Research, and is currently as a professor at Harvard. John Engler, president of the Business Roundtable, three-term governor of Michigan. Mr. Engler, Governor Engler, was president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. And Edward Kleinbard, Chief of Staff of the Joint Committee of Taxation from 2007 to 2009. He has 20 years of experience practicing tax law in New York and is currently the professor of law at the University of Southern California. It's an extraordinary panel. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. Senator Crapo.